In Unit 14, Part 2, we are looking at another way to solve equations that involve fractions. We're going to look at solving equations that involve fractions and solving equations that involve decimals and solving inequalities that involve fractions. So, in Part 1, we looked at using the multiplicative inverse. In Part 2, we're going to do what's called clearing fractions. So it says to solve each equation, and if you look at our first one, it has 3 different fractions in the equation. So to do the method of clearing fractions, the first thing you have to do is find a least common denominator. Now at this point, I'm assuming you know how to do least common denominator. If you're still struggling with least common denominator, please come get help from me. So I need to use the least common denominator of all 3 denominators. So 12, 3, and 3. So the least common denominator would be 12. Now, I multiplied every single part of this equation by 12. Or in this case, I want to write it as 12 over 1. So I do 12 over 1 times 1/12 minus 12 over 1 times 2/3 x equals 12 over 1 times 1/3. So every fraction I multiplied by 12 over 1. Also notice that I kept that negative in there. So 12 over 1 times 1 over 12 is just the reciprocal, so that's just going to be 1. Here I can simplify 12 and 3, so 3 divided by 3 is 1. 12 divided by 3 is 4. So when I do that, I'll get 8x. And then 3 divided by 3 is 1. 12 divided by 3 is 4. So on the other side, I'll get 4. So now I've cleared the fractions, and it's just a 2-step equation. So I'm going to subtract 1 from both sides. So I'm trying to get x by itself. Notice that the negative came down to 8. 4 minus 1 is 3. So we're going to get x by itself. I divide by negative 8. Now, that doesn't work out clean, so I'm just going to leave it as a fraction. So x equals negative 3 over 8. Now let's look at number 2. So my denominators are 3, 9, and 36. So I need the least common denominator of all of those. So my LCD in this case is going to be 36. So that means I'm multiplying everything in the equation by 36 over 1. So everything is multiplied by 36 over 1. So on the left side, 3 divided by 3 is 1. 36 divided by 3 is 12. 12 times 2 is 24. 9 divided by 9 is 1. 36 divided by 9 is 4. So that's 28x. And then the 36's cancel out. So I wind up with 11 over 1 and just 11. Then I'm going to subtract 11 from both sides. So I'm trying to get x by itself. So that's 13 equals 28x. And then my last step to get x by itself is divide by 28. So 13 over 28 equals x. Alright, so that is solving an equation by clearing fractions. So the next thing I want to look at is solving an equation by clearing decimals. So if you look, I have 2.3x plus 9.2 equals 23. So first, of course, I need to rewrite this. Box and rewrite, so I have 2.3x plus 9.2 equals 23. So to clear decimals, I'm always going to multiply some power of 10. So like 10, 100, 1,000, whatever. Now I determine that by how many decimal places I have. So 2.3 and 9.2 are both to the 10th power. So that tells me that I'm going to multiply everything by 10. So I'm going to do 10 times 2.3x plus 10 times 9.2 equals 10 times 23. Multiplying everything by 10, so I have 1 decimal place, which means I have 1 0. So that's going to give me 23x plus 92 equals 230. So now it's a 2-step equation, so I subtract 92 on both sides. I get 23x equals 138. Then my last step is to divide by 23. 138 divided by 23 is 6. So that'll be my answer there. If you look at number 2, again, I'm going to start by boxing and rewriting. So I have 26.4 equals 6.6x plus 10.5 6. Now again, remember I'm going to multiply by power of 10. But if you look at 2 decimals that go to the 10th place and 1 decimal goes to the 100th place, I have to multiply by whatever the most amount of decimals are. So what I mean by that is for this one, I have to multiply everything by 100. Because this has 2 decimal places, so I need 2 zeros. So everything is multiplied by 100. So that's going to be 2,640 for this one, 660x, and then 1,056. So now I'm trying to solve for x, so it's a 2-step equation. 1,056 on both sides. So it'll give me 1584 equals 660x. Then we're going to divide both sides by 660. And I'll get 2.4 equals x. So that'll be my answer there. Looking at the bottom of the page, the last thing we're going to do is solve inequalities by clearing fractions. So the same thing we did at the top, only difference is now we have inequality symbols instead of equal signs. So I'm going to leave number 1 for you guys. I'll show you how to do number 2 and then go back to do number 1. So I want to start by boxing and rewriting, which I don't know if I did that in the first section. By box and rewrite, I also need to figure out what my least common denominator is. So for 9, 9, and 3, my least common denominator is going to be 9. So that means everything needs to get multiplied by 9 over 1. Also very important to realize that I kept this subtraction. So now these 9s will cancel out, so I'll have negative 5x. Don't forget about that negative. These 9s will cancel out, so I'll have minus 1. And that'll be less than 3 becomes 1, 9 becomes 3, so less than 3. I add the 1 over, so I get negative 5x is less than 4. Last step is to divide by negative 5. Now I did the second equation because I wanted to make sure I reminded you that when I do this division, I get x, and then dividing by a negative makes this inequality equation, so negative 4 over 5. X is greater than negative 4 over 5. So let me rewrite that, because that was so again, when I divide by the negative 5, that flips the inequality. Alright, so now I've done that one, you guys can go ahead and go back and do number 1. On the back side, we have an area problem here. It says describe the possible values of x if the area of the rectangle is at least 40 square inches. So just as a reminder, find the area of the rectangle. I'm doing length times width. So in this case, that means I'm doing 4 times 5/8 x plus 5. And it says at least 40 square inches, which means it's got to be greater than or equal to 40. Because 40 is the lowest number it can be. So here I'm set up to do distributive properties. So I'm going to do 4 over 1 times 5 over 8x plus 4 over 1 times 5 over 1, or just 4 times 5. So when I do that, 4 becomes 1, 8 becomes 2, so I get 5x plus 20 greater than equal to 40. At this point, it's a 2-step equation, so I'm going to subtract 20 from both sides, and I'll get 5x is greater than equal to 40. Then I can divide both sides by 5, so I'll get x is greater than equal to 8. Okay, so the question was, describe the possible values of x, so x is 8 or anything greater than 8. All right, on the bottom there are some review problems we did just a couple units ago, so make sure you get those done and grade them from there.